It all started when I noticed my water pressure was suddenly weaker than usual. At first, I thought it was just a pipe issue on my end, maybe a small leak or some clogging. But the more I checked, the more everything seemed fine, until I spotted a freshly dug patch near the fence line between my property and Karen's. Now, let me tell you, Karen is the kind of neighbor who's always got something going on, whether it's her music too loud at 6 a.m. or borrowing tools without asking. But tapping into my private water line, that was a whole new level. I followed the trail, and sure enough, I found a sneaky connection running straight from my line over to her place. No note, no ask, just full-blown backyard theft. And with the summer heat kicking in, water isn't just water out here, it's survival, especially with livestock. That's when I decided if she wanted to use my water so badly, I'd give her something a little different, something straight from the cattle tank. I made one simple switch, clean water off, sludge line on, and then I waited. What happened next was nothing short of priceless, but let's just say Karen got a taste of what happens when you mess with the wrong neighbor. And that's when things really started to spiral. See, out here in the countryside, everyone depends on their own setup. Private water lines, septic systems, cattle tanks, the works. It's not like the city where you just call someone when things go wrong. You handle it yourself, and you respect your neighbors. At least, most people do. Karen moved in about 8 months ago. City woman, big attitude, and somehow always had an opinion on how I should run my property. At first, I tried to be patient, helped her out when her pipes froze, loaned her a hose when her sprinkler system broke, but she kept pushing. And now she'd gone and tapped into my water like it was hers. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted to be sure, so I marked my meter and waited. Sure enough, the numbers jumped overnight, even though no one at my place had used a drop. That was the final straw, but I couldn't just accuse her without proof. So I quietly rerouted the line to an old cattle tank we used to store runoff. That water's thick, muddy, and smells like it's been sitting out in the sun for a week, because it has. Then I waited again. The next morning, I saw her sprinkler going full blast, right on schedule. But this time, something looked different, and that's when things started unraveling fast. The first sign that something was off came when I saw Karen outside, pacing her yard with a phone in one hand and what looked like a damp rag in the other. Her sprinklers had shut off mid-cycle, and big brown patches of sludge was soaking into her lawn. From my spot on the porch, I watched her sniff the air, her face twisting like she'd just walked through a barn. Technically, she kind of had. But here's where it got really strange. Later that day, a city truck rolled up. Public Works. Now, this didn't make sense because we're outside city limits. We don't get those services. I stayed quiet and just observed from behind my front windows. Karen greeted them like they were old friends, pointing toward her yard, waving her arms. I couldn't hear the words, but her dramatic hand movements said enough. She was up to something. Meanwhile, I started getting weird texts from an unknown number. Stuff like, "You'll regret this," and "Hope your livestock like surprises." At first, I thought it was a prank, until I noticed one of my cows acting sick. Now, I couldn't prove anything yet, but the timing was too perfect, and the tension was rising fast. Between the bad water, the city trucks, and the shady messages, it was clear this wasn't just about a stolen water line anymore. Something deeper was going on. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound outside had me peeking through the blinds. I double-checked the barn, made sure the cattle tank was sealed off, and even set up one of those old motion lights by the gate. Something wasn't sitting right. The texts hadn't stopped, just short, creepy stuff like, "You think you're smart," and "Let's see who runs dry next." I didn't respond, but I started documenting everything just in case. The next morning, I found tire tracks on the edge of my pasture, right by the back fence. They weren't mine. Someone had come through overnight, and they'd left the gate half open. One of my cows had wandered out, but luckily hadn't gone far. That's when I realized this was turning into more than just a neighborly dispute. Karen wasn't just angry, she was retaliating. Later that day, a drone buzzed over my yard, not a toy, the kind with a camera. It hovered for a few seconds, then zipped off toward her property. I followed it with binoculars, and sure enough, it landed right on her back porch. She was watching me the whole time. My well pump started acting funny that afternoon too. Pressure kept dropping, then spiking again like someone was tampering with the lines. I knew if I didn't do something fast, I might lose more than just water. And that's when I made a decision I couldn't take back. I couldn't keep waiting for something to break. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. So I decided to pay Karen a visit, no more playing the quiet neighbor. I grabbed my boots and headed out, determined to confront her. But when I reached her front door, it was wide open, like she was expecting me. The place was eerily quiet, and the air smelled like dust and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic. I knocked once, then stepped inside. "Karen?" I called out, but no answer. My heart started racing as I took a few steps further in. The house looked like it hadn't been lived in for weeks. Furniture covered in sheets, drawers left half open. It was clear she wasn't home, but someone had definitely been there recently. A strange feeling crept up my spine as I noticed a notebook on the kitchen counter, filled with scribbled notes in her handwriting. I flipped it open, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There, in the middle of the page, was a list of names, mine among them. But it wasn't just names. There were dates, times, and details about my property. What kind of game was she playing? And that's when I realized this wasn't just a water dispute. Karen had been watching me long before I even knew it. I heard a noise coming from the back of the house, and before I could turn, I felt something cold at my neck. A voice, low and controlled, whispered, "Thought you could outsmart me, huh?" I froze. The real game was just beginning. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The cold pressure at my neck stayed steady, and for a moment, I thought I might be done for. Karen's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who had been planning this for far longer than I could imagine. "You should have minded your own business," she said, a dark edge creeping into her words. "You never should have switched out that water." My mind raced. What had she done? Why was she threatening me like this? I knew I'd messed with her water line, but this was something else entirely. "Karen," I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm, "what is this really about?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, she pulled the gun away. I turned just enough to catch her face in the dim light. She was shaking, her eyes wild with something I couldn't place. Fear? Anger? Maybe both. "You think I was just after water?" She scoffed, her voice now cracking. "I've been watching you because you have something I need." She motioned to the notebook on the counter. "You're sitting on a gold mine, and you've never realized it." The confusion must have shown on my face because she stepped forward and grabbed the notebook, flipping through the pages with manic energy. "You have more than just a water supply," she continued, her voice rising. "You have access to something the city wants, something I was hired to find." That's when it hit me. Her whole game wasn't about water. It was about land. My property had something rare buried beneath it, an old pipeline, abandoned for years, that carried valuable minerals. The water line was just her cover, her way of getting close enough to figure out where I kept my private documents. I stepped back, suddenly understanding the full scope of her plan. She wasn't just some petty neighbor. She was a hired hand in something much bigger. Before I could process it, there was a loud crash at the back door. Both of us froze. I barely had time to react before a group of men burst in, dressed in plain clothes, their faces masked. The leader looked at Karen and then at me, his eyes narrowing. Well, looks like we're all in the same business now," he said, smirking. "Your neighbor's been a little too friendly with our interests. Too bad for you, you're not part of the deal." I didn't have time to think. The door slammed behind the men, and just like that, my quiet life in the countryside had turned into something dangerous, something I had no control over. And as the world around me tilted, I realized one thing. Karen had never been the real enemy. She was just the first pawn in a much larger game. The men didn't waste time. They shoved me toward the door, and for a second, I thought that was it. But then, everything changed. One of the guys, the leader, made a mistake. He mentioned a deal they had with Karen, and that's when I saw the real opportunity. Karen wasn't as in control as she seemed. She was just another piece in their puzzle. I didn't know if it was instinct or pure adrenaline, but in that moment I acted. I kicked the door open and bolted out, running toward the barn. I knew the land better than anyone, and I had one shot at getting ahead. The men followed, but they weren't familiar with the terrain, and they weren't prepared for how quickly I could move when it counted. By the time they reached the barn, I had already sent a message to the local sheriff. They might have been hired guns, but they weren't ready for a community that didn't back down. The authorities showed up fast. With their help, we found out the truth. Karen had been working for a shady real estate syndicate, using my property to dig up valuable resources. As for Karen, well, she was arrested, and I finally got back to what mattered: my land, my water, and my peace. Sometimes, the quietest neighbors have the darkest secrets, but now I knew I'd always be watching too.